Hello, and welcome to Scattered Terrain. My name is Meredith, and today I'm going to be showing you how I make my little candelabra.
To make a candelabra, you're going to need some beads, eye pins, you can find these with jewelry making supplies, some small sequins, a pair of needle nose pliers, a pair of wire cutters, some super glue and baking soda, a styrene rod, although there are a few alternatives to this I'll discuss later in the video. Then you're going to need some glue to make the candle wax, a hot glue gun, and it helps if you have one with a low temperature setting. And finally, you're going to need some paint. In addition to these two, I'll also be using a few shades of yellow and orange for the flames. I'm going to start by building the base of the candelabra. I find that cap beads are a wonderful shape for this. You're also going to need 3 eye pins. Then I'm going to get my super glue ready to use and grab my baking soda. And then I'm going to straighten out all of my eye pins and get them lined up so that they lay together nicely. Then I'm going to feed them through the bottom of my cap bead. That way, as I pull them through, the eyes will get stopped on the inside of the bead and get held in place. Then holding the candelabra upside down, with a good firm pressure keeping these eye pins tight against that bead, I'm going to sprinkle some baking soda into the cavity. You want to put a decent amount, but you don't want to go overboard. Then I'm going to grab my super glue and put just a few drops down on top of that baking soda, and I'm immediately going to start pulling downward on those eye pins to make sure I've got good contact. The super glue and the baking soda, when they combine, almost immediately become a very hard plastic-like substance. And then I'm going to just sprinkle a little bit more baking soda over the top here to make sure that it's completely hardened. And then I'll just knock off any extra. All right, and that is now locked in place. Then I'm going to grab a permanent marker, and I'm going to measure 1/2 inch from the top of the bead and make a line. This gives me a good clear mark of where I'm going to be lining up my next bead. Speaking of, we'll go ahead and grab that next bead. And then you want to take a moment to adjust the way that the eye pins are laying to make sure that they aren't twisted or overlapping each other. When you feed these into the bead, if they aren't straight, it's going to bind up, like this. So we'll just get those lined up correctly, and then slide our bead on. And here you see all of our eye pins are laying nicely. Then put a little bit of super glue just above the line, and wiggle your bead down into place. Then I'm going to take a good firm hold of that bead and grab one of the eye pins and bend it down until it's at almost a 90-degree angle away from the others. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing to the eye pin on the opposite side, leaving that center eye pin completely straight. Then I'm just going to pull my bead back up into place here and make sure that everything's where I want it. And then I'm going to set him aside for a few minutes to give that super glue time to dry. Then once again, I'm going to grab that permanent marker, and I'm going to mark out 1/8 of an inch above the top of the bead on the center eye pin, and I'm going to mark out 1/4 of an inch away on each of the 2 side arms. It should look something like this. Next, I'm going to grab my final 3 beads. Any beads that you've got on hand will work just fine for this project. I just like making sure that these 3 beads are a little bit smaller than that last bead that we put on. And then using those needle nose pliers, you're going to grip just on the outside of that mark that you made and bend up so that the mark is on the corner. And you want to bend it until it runs parallel to that center pole. Then flip it over and bend the other side as well at that same mark. And then I like to turn and look at the profile of the candelabra, and this is the time to adjust the wires and make sure that everybody is lined up and straight. All right, yeah, that's looking good. We'll just bend this guy a little bit more until he's straight. And then I grab my super glue, and once again I'm going to just put a small dot right above my mark. And then I'm going to feed the bead onto the wire and wiggle it down into place. Then grab the super glue and repeat that same step on the other 2 arms. Now, in order to avoid touching the super glue while I'm putting the beads on, I find it very useful to use the pad of my finger to press against the bead and gently lift it up off of the wire before dancing it into place. This allows me to have a little bit more fine control over exactly where the bead ends up. And then once you're happy with where everything's laying, just set him aside to harden. Once you're sure that those beads aren't going anywhere, it's time to grab our sequins. You want to put a little bit of super glue onto the very top of the bead, and then thread your sequin into place on top of it, and make sure that it's sitting level and at the angle that you want it. Then repeat that same step on the other 2 arms. And when you're threading that sequin onto the eye pin, you want to take a moment and make sure that it's sitting like a bowl and not like an umbrella. This is the candle cup, so you want to make sure that it has a lip. Now, depending on the look you're going for, you could stop here and trim your eye pins down to be sticking up just above your sequins. This would give you a look of an empty candelabra that was standing waiting to be refilled with fresh candles. And sometimes if it doesn't quite land the way you want it to, you just have to hold it in place for a moment at a better angle. There we go, that looks better. And once again, we're going to give this a little bit of time to harden. Just get these out of the way. Now before we move on to the candles, I want to go over a few options. Before settling on my final design, I did a few experiments with my various options to see what was going to work best. I tried half with tacky glue and half with Elmer's glue. The first option I looked into for the candles were trumpet beads. These worked surprisingly well, though they are the smallest option. Next, I grabbed a cheap Q-tip from the dollar store and tried using its center bit. That also worked remarkably well. My final test was with Styrene Rod, and unsurprisingly, it also worked a charm. All in all, my experiment was a complete success. All 3 options worked perfectly well. Because I had it, I decided to go ahead and use the Styrene Rod. So I started off by grabbing a pencil and marking out 1/4-inch lengths along the rod, and then I grabbed my utility knife. I find this is the best way to cut through the Styrene Rod and get a good clean line. You just lay the blade of the knife directly on top of your cut line, and then give a gentle rocking back and forth motion while you press slowly down, and it should cut through cleanly without sending it shooting across the room. Every once in a while, you still wind up chasing a piece. Then we're gonna grab our main candelabra body, and I decided to go with tacky glue. In my experiments, I found that the Elmer's glue dried a little bit flatter, whereas the tacky glue stayed a little more 3-dimensional. And with the candle wax, that's gonna give me the texture I'm looking for. So I put a nice little dot of glue on all 3 of my eye pins. Then I'm gonna grab one of my candles, and I'm gonna spin it with my finger while I slowly lower it over the glue. This spinning motion as I slowly work down helps the glue to work its way up into the body of the candle and not just squish out all over the sequin on the bottom as I press down. And then you're going to grab the next candle and use that same spin to just lower it into place. And do the same with the final candle. And just make sure they're centered. All right, we are almost done. Now this gives us the main body of our candle, but it doesn't quite look like a candle yet. For that, we're gonna need to add some melting wax dripping down the sides. So I'm gonna grab my fancy palette, and to apply the glue for this, I'm going to use a toothpick. So I'm going to squeeze a little dollop of glue out onto my palette, and then using the toothpick, I'm going to pick up a ball of glue and gently fill in around the top of the candle where it meets the eye pin so that you don't have a gap. Then adding a little bit more glue, I'm going to allow it to build up on a single spot and then tease it down the front of the candle just as if it was the melted wax dripping out. And make sure to let a little bit of it pool up here in the cup at the bottom too. And when you're happy with how your wax strip looks, go ahead and move to the next candle, filling in that wax around the top, then picking a point to build up, teasing it down the body of the candle, and pooling it in the candle cup. While you're welcome to cover these candles in as many wax rivulets as you'd like, if you look at any real candles while they're burning, you'll find that it tends to find one spot to release its wax, and at that point, all of the wax goes from that same point. And we'll just fill in a little bit more wax in the bottom of this cup here. All right, that is looking good. Now I just set this guy aside to dry. And once he's dry, as you see here, that tacky glue is going to shrink down a little bit, but not nearly as much as the Elmer's glue would. If all you've got is Elmer's, that'll work perfectly fine. You just may need to do this wax build-up step a couple of times before it's thick enough for you to be able to really see it. Then once again, we're going to grab that permanent marker, and this time we're going to mark 1/4 of an inch from the top of our candle, just like so. Then I'm going to grab my wire cutters, And I'm going to trim each eye pin at the mark. And I'm just going to angle this guy down at the table while I clip him here. And I didn't quite take enough off, so we're going to trim a little more here. There we go. And then I'll move to the center eye pin and do that same thing, making sure I'm cutting on the line. And then just trimming off on this final pin. You know, I still think this one's a little too long. All right, there we go. Like the look of that now. Just clean up my little wire trimmings here. Then I'm going to take him outside and give him a spray coat in black primer. Once that's dry, bring him back inside, and we're going to give him an overbrushing with a metallic. So grabbing my fancy palette again and a paper towel. For these particular candelabra, I'm looking to get an aged brass effect. So I'm going to be using Emperor's Gold. So we'll just put a little bit down here on the palette. And then I'm going to grab a cheap eyeshadow brush as my dry brush. Work a good amount in here. And then work some of the paint off onto the paper towel, but not too much. This isn't really a dry brushing so much as an overbrushing. And then I'm going to make very gentle little swiping, stabbing motions with the brush to do a sort of streaky, spongy effect with the paint. Beads don't have a lot of texture on their own, so you want a little bit of texturing to occur with your brush strokes. And with all of those little black bits showing through in the deeper recesses, it creates that nice aged brass. And you want to make sure to tip it up and do the insides of the candle cups as well. And once you're sure you've got a good coating all over your candelabra, tip it up and give a quick coating to the underside too. If for any reason your players decide to start stacking candelabra up, you don't want the underside to not be painted. Then I'll just get this out of the way, and we'll set him aside to dry. Once he is dried to the touch, I'm going to grab my palette again, and this time I'm going to use a light mocha paint, and we're going to paint in the candles. Then I'm going to grab my fine pointed detail brush and use this color to paint in all of my candle wax. I find it's very helpful to start at the base of the candle and pull up to the tip. This helps to prevent accidentally painting too much wax into the candle cup. That being said, while you do want to be careful, if you accidentally do hit something that you don't want to with this color, because it's candle wax, it'll be okay. It'll just look like a place where it dripped a little bit extra. And you want to make sure to paint the top of the candle around the wick as well, though make sure to leave the wick itself that original black. And you also want to make sure to paint that wax runoff that we left in the candle cup at the bottom. It's those little details and imperfections like that that sell the reality of the scene. And you want to be making sure that you're painting a fairly thick layer with this. Not only is it going to help you get good coverage over that black, but the texture of the thicker paint also has a bit of a waxiness to it. So this is one of the few times when you're painting that you can go ahead and paint thick. And we'll touch up this final candle top here. And then go back and touch up any spots that I can still see black showing through. Just a little more right here. All right, and then give him a quick once-over, see if we're missing any other spots. This still is showing through just a bit right here. Once again, we're at that point where if you wanted to, you could go ahead and trim your candle wicks down to being about 1/8 of an inch above the top of your candle and stop right here, and they would look absolutely wonderful as unlit candles. But I'm going to take it one step further. So let's go ahead and add our candle flames. So you're going to grab your hot glue gun, and then holding the hot glue gun with one hand and the candelabra with the other, you're going to very gently insert the eye pin into the opening of your hot glue gun while gently pulling on the trigger ever so slightly. And then right as the hot glue starts to build up into a bit of a ball, you want to slowly drag the hot glue gun backwards off of the eye pin and away from the candelabra, allowing the glue to come to a point. And you want to pause a moment as you're pulling back to give that hot glue time to set up just a little bit, that way it holds its point. I also found it helpful to build up a little bit of glue at the tip of the hot glue gun before inserting the eye pin, sort of giving it a little bit of a head start on that buildup. And if your flame's a little bit longer than you want it to be, or if it starts to go off at an angle, just use your finger and thumb to very gently pinch at that tip and pull off any extra. Once the hot glue has had a little bit of time to set, we're going to paint the flames. So once again, I'm going to grab my fancy palette and paper towel, and this time I'm also going to grab a cup of water. I'm going to be using 3 shades of yellow into orange. So starting with my lightest yellow, I'm going to put a little bit onto my palette, and then I'm going to dampen a medium-sized brush and work some yellow paint into it. And then starting at the base of the flame and working up, I'm going to just give a nice coating of this very translucent yellow all over the flame. Don't worry about the fact that you can see through it. We're going to be building up multiple layers. And repeat this exact same process on all 3 flames. Once you've finished the 3rd flame, you can circle back to the 1st flame and put a second thin coat of that yellow over the top. Doing the same again with that 2nd and 3rd flame. Give the brush a quick rinse here. Then I'm going to grab my medium shade of yellow-orange, put a little bit of that down as well. And then with a brush that isn't quite as damp this time, I'm going to start just a little bit higher up the candle flame than last time, and then cover from just above the base of the flame out to the tip. You almost want to be thinking of candy corn when you're painting these. Give the brush another quick rinse, and then grab our final vibrant orange. And with our brush the driest it's been yet, we're going to take that vibrant orange and cover the top 1/3 of our flame, paying special attention to the tip. And you don't necessarily want this to be an even ring all the way around. You want the orange to sort of dip a little bit in the center of each flame and come up a little on the edges. All right, that's looking good. As our final step, we're going to rinse that brush out one more time, and then leaving it pretty damp again, going back to that original yellow, we're just going to do a little bit of a yellow wash over the whole flame. This final yellow wash really helps to blend all of our layers of orange and yellow together and make a nice smooth transition. It also helps to bring some of that brightness back in case the orange dulled it down a little bit. Oh, and it looks like on this one I actually killed a little bit too much of that medium yellow, so we'll just add a little bit medium yellow into this final wash as well. And then touch those tips back up with the vibrant orange. And then I'm gonna just spend a little bit of time working between my 3 colors of orange, doing a little bit of a wet blend here on my candle. This is a very small piece and you're never gonna be looking at it too close, so it's all right if this is a little bit messy, and this is a wonderful place to sort of experiment with blending those paint colors together. As long as it's lightest at the bottom and darkest at the tip, it'll look just fine. Then when you've gotten it to a point where you're happy with how the flames look, you can set him aside to dry one last time. And there you have it, a beautiful beaded candelabra. Now at this point, I do like to take it outside and give it a quick spray with a matte varnish, but that step is entirely optional. And if you can't find these exact beads, don't worry. Any beads that you have will work perfectly fine. Here's an example of some candelabras that I made using round wooden beads, buttons, and a couple of jump rings. So experiment with whatever beads you've got on hand. You might be surprised at how good it looks when you're done. For now, let's go see how these are going to look on the table. There's a stillness in the air as you enter the ancient temple. The candles have been lit, causing the shadows to flicker and dance. Out of the corner of your eye, you catch a sudden movement. Leaping out from behind the statues, a band of kobolds catches you by surprise. Roll for initiative.
And so there you have it. That's how I make my candelabra. Tune into the next video. I'm going to be showing you how I make my statues. Stick around.
Thanks for spending some of your time here with me at Scattered Terrain. If you liked that video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you next time.